In this video, I will show you how to use two JavaScript types which are arrays and objects. These types are very important to create a front-end application. So I will show you how to create and read arrays, how to use the array destructuring, the spread operator, the for loop, and the map function. Then we will see how to delete array elements. Also, I will show you the difference between JavaScript objects and JSON objects. Then we will see how to create and read objects, how to use the object destructuring and the spread operator. Now I will show you how to use arrays and objects, so we can write the different statements in the index file of our React application. Let's start with the arrays. So let's create our first array. We can use the let keyword, then the name of the array. We can call it my array1. So we need to write brackets, and then we can define the different elements. So the elements can be of any type. They can be of type string, for example. So this is the first element, then we need comma, then we can define more elements. Let's add two elements of type integer, and let's add another element of type boolean. Now we can display the value of this array on the console. So we can use console.log. So as a string, we can write the name of our array. Then we can add a second parameter, which will be the array itself. Let's save this. And to see the output, we need to open the console. So let's make a right click, then inspect, then console. So here we have my array1, and this is the content of the array. We can increase a little bit the size. Now let's read the data of this array. So let's create a variable. Let's call it a, for example, and it is equal to my array1 of 2, for example. This means that a will be equal to this value, 152. Let's display the value of a on the console. So here we can write a equal, then plus, then the value of a. Let's save this. So here we can see that a is equal to 152. So instead of reading the data of one array element by element, we can use the array destructuring. This means that we can create several variables and we can initialize them simultaneously using the data of the array. So now I will show you how to use the array destructuring. So let's create two variables and let's initialize them using the data of this array. To do this, we can use either let or var or const. Then we have to use brackets, and then we can define the variables. So let's define two variables called b and c. So here we have two variables, b and c, and they are equal to our array, which is my array1. This means that b will be the first element of this array, which is blue, and c will be the second element, which is green. Now let's display b and c on the console. Let's copy this. Let's paste it twice. So here we have b, and here we have c. Let's save this. So here we can see that b is equal to blue, which is the first element of the array, and c is green, which is the second element of the array. So we can use the array destructuring with any number of variables. So we can add a third variable. Let's call it d. Then let's display the value of d on the console. So d is the third element, which is this value. Let's save this. and you can see that D is equal to 152. Another operator that is very useful with arrays is the spread operator. So now I will show you how to use it. So the spread operator is the 3-dot operator, and it allows us to copy arrays. Now let's create a new array. Let's call it my array2. And it is a copy of my array1. So we have to write brackets, then 3-dot, which is the spread operator, then the name of the array that we want to copy, which is my array1. Now we can display my array2 on the console. Let's save this. And here we have my array2 is equal to this value, which is the same as my array1. We can add more elements to my array2, so we can add elements before and after the spread operator. Let's save this. So here we can see that my array2 contains 1, then a copy of my array1, and then we have 2 additional elements. It is also possible to use the spread operator to concatenate 2 arrays. So here let's create a new array. Let's call it my array3. And let's concatenate my array1 and my array2. So let's use the spread operator, then my array1, then comma, then the spread operator again, then my array2. Let's display my array3 on the console, so let's copy this. Let's save this. And here we have my array3. So it contains at the beginning a copy of my array1, then we have the data of my array2. So to see all the elements, we can just expand it. And here we can see the data of my array2. Now I will show you how to use the for loop. So let's display the data of my array1. And we need the length of my array1, so we have to write my array1.length. Then brackets, then let's concatenate the value of I, then let's close the brackets. Then let's display the value of the element at the position I. So here we have to write my array1 of I. Let's save this. And here we can see that we have my array1 of 0 is equal to the first element, and my array1 of 4 is equal to the last element. Now I will show you how to use the map function. So the map function allows us to make a copy of an array based on a callback function that we have to provide to the map function. So let's create a new array. Let's call it my array4. And it is equal to my array1.map. And this map function requires as a parameter a function. So we can either define an arrow function, or also we can define a function and we can provide it to the map function. So here let's create a new function. Let's call it fn1. So this function requires as a parameter one element of this array, and it will return the element that we want to save into the new array. So let's call this parameter x, and let's return x. Then let's provide this function to the map function. Now let's display the value of my array4. Let's save this. And here we can see that my array 4 is a copy of my array 1. So instead of providing the map function with a new function, we can create an arrow function. So here for every element of the array, my array 1, let's call it x, we will return x. Let's save this. And we have the same result. So the function that we have to provide to the map function can accept more than one parameter. So it can accept two parameters, the element of the array and the index of this element in the array. So now let's update this arrow function and let's provide it with two parameters. So the first parameter will be the element and the second parameter will be the index. Let's call it idx. Then let's define the body of this arrow function. So let's put the x between brackets. Then let's return x. Also let's display the value of x and the index on the console. So here we will display the value of x, which is one element of this array, and its position inside this array. Let's save this. And here we can see that we have the different elements of the array and their position inside the array. We can also use the map function to filter an array. So let's create a new array. Let's call it my array 5. And it is equal to my array1.map. Then we will provide this map function with this function. Then let's implement this function to filter the array. So if the array element is an integer, we will return it, otherwise we will return 0. So here let's add an if condition. Let's use number dot is integer, and let's check the type of the element x. So if the element x is of type integer, we will return it. Otherwise we will return 0. Then let's display my array 5 on the console. Let's save the file. So here we can see that the first and second elements are 0 because they are of type string, and the last element is of type boolean, so it is not an integer, and that's why we have 0 here. But for this element and this element we have their values. Now I will show you how to delete array elements using two functions, splice and filter. Let's create a new array. Let's call it my array 6. And initially it is a copy of my array 1. Then let's delete the third element of my array 1 from my array 6. So here we have to write my array 6 dot splice. So splice requires two parameters. The first parameter is the index of the element that we want to delete, and because we want to delete the third element, the index is 2. Then the second parameter will be the number of elements that we want to delete, and I want to delete only one element, so let's write 1. This means that my array 6 will be a copy of my array 1 that does not have the third element of my array 1. Now let's display my array 6 on the console. Let's save this. So here we have my array 6. It contains only 4 elements, while my array 1 contains 5 elements. and you can see that the third element of my array 1 is absent in my array 6. Now let's create a new array that only contains elements from my array 1 that are of type integer. So here let's create a new array. Let's call it my array 7. And to filter my array 1, we have to use my array 1 dot filter. So filter requires as a parameter a function that will filter the array. Let's copy this function. Let's paste it here. Let's call it filter function. So we can provide this function with only one parameter, which is an element of this array, or two parameters, the element and its index. In our case, we only need the element, so we can provide this function with only one element, which is the array element. And if this element is of type integer, we will return it. Otherwise, we will not return anything. So let's delete this, and let's provide this function to the filter function. Now let's display my array 7 on the console. Let's save this. And we can see that my array 7 only contains integer values of my array 1. So JavaScript defines the object type, which is very similar to JSON objects, but there are a few differences. So the JavaScript object is also called object literal, and the property name of a JavaScript object can be written between double quotes, but this is optional, so we can write the property name without double quotes. Also, the property value can be of any type. However, for JSON objects, the property name must be written between double quotes, and the property value is limited to several types. It can be of type string, number, true, false, null, arrays, or another JSON object. This means that JSON cannot express methods or non-plain objects like date. To conclude, JSON is a strict subset of JavaScript objects. This means that every valid JSON text can be parsed as an object literal. Now let's see how we can use JavaScript objects. So let's create an object. Let's call it my object 1. And to initialize it, we have to use brackets. Then we have to define the different properties of this object. So let's suppose that the first property is called first name. Then to provide the value, we have to add colon, and then between double quotes, we can provide a string. So this is a property of this JavaScript object. We can display it without quotes, or also we can display it between quotes. In my case, I prefer to display it without quotes. Then to add more properties, we have to add comma, then we have to define the name of the property. So we can add more properties. And here we can see that the age is of type integer. Then we have the address, which is a string. Now let's display my object 1 on the console. Let's save this. So here we can see my object 1, and this is the data of the object. So we have the first name, last name, age, and address. We can also create an object using variables. So let's create 3 variables. Then let's create an object using these variables. Let's call it my object 2. So the properties of this object have the same name as these variables, and the values of these properties are the same values as these variables. So now let's display object 2 on the console. Let's copy this. Let's save it. So here we can see that for my object 2, the properties are called as the name of the variables and the values are the values of the variables. Now let's read the object properties. So let's create a variable, let's call it f for example, and it is equal to my object1.firstName. Then let's display the value of f on the console. Let's save the file. And here we have firstName is equal to John. So instead of reading the object properties one by one, we can read them simultaneously using the object destructuring. This is similar to the array destructuring. So let's define two variables. We have to define them between brackets, and the name of the variables should be the same name as the name of the properties that we want to read. In our case, we need to read the first name and the last name, so we need to create variables called first name and last name. And we have to separate them with comma. So these two variables are equal to my object1. Then let's display these two variables on the console. Let's save this. And here we have first name John and last name Smith. So if we create variables with names different than the object properties, in this case we will have undefined as a result. So let's copy this. Let's paste it here. Instead of first name, last name, let's create V and W. Now let's display these two variables on the console. So let's copy this. So here we want to display the value of V and W. Let's save the file. And this time we have undefined. Now let's see how we can use the spread operator with objects. So the spread operator is very useful with objects because it allows us to copy and to concatenate objects. So let's create a new object. Let's call it my object3. And initially it is a copy of my object1. So to use the spread operator, we have to write 3 dots, then the name of the object that we want to copy, which is my object1. Now let's display my object3 on the console. We can copy this. Let's save the file. So here we have my object3, which is a copy of my object1. So instead of making a simple copy of an object, we can make a copy and we can update the data of the initial object. So here let's update the first name. So let's write first name. Then let's provide the new value, Bill for example. We can also insert new properties. So let's insert the email. Let's save the file. So here for my object3, we can see that the first name is Bill. It is not John. Also we have the same last name, the same age, the same address. And also we can see that we have the email property, which is equal to this value.